prior to her moving there in the mid-1970s, the whole Salem that we know it today really didn't exist in terms of what it was or how people talked about it. So while it has that history of, the witch trials and all of those things, it didn't really become a big touristy place until Lori made it that way. She really did. She went there and she set up there, and she's really been sort of a propellant over the many years, propelling forward the idea of getting rid of the concept of witches being ugly old hags with warts on their noses and, those kinds of things, right? Because they're not. And, even modern day witches. But, we often see even in Hollywood, they love to depict, somebody going out into the woods looking for the county's witch, and she lives in some old pig bramble sty, and she's some old dirty woman with, dead rabbits hanging for, and it's, for the most part, you're getting and that's really what she wanted to dispel, was that that's not what it's about, right? And again, that comes from the religious beliefs of them being evil and out to hurt people. And so, Salem now is very different from obviously what Salem was in in the 17th century. But, certainly then there were quite a lot of things that those people were, they were highly superstitious, and there was a lot at play there. So when we see the depictions of the stories, even going back to the Salem witch trials, and let's say Sarah Good, who would be, she's, I don't know, like maybe 18th great grandmother kind of thing on my grandmother's side. For me, going back, her story, they often depict her as this old woman. And they always say, oh, this old woman, and she's this old woman. And she was only 38 years old when she was taken and put into prison. And she had a 4-year-old daughter who was put in there with her, and she was pregnant with another child. So she wasn't an old woman, an old hag woman with white hair and she was at that time,
pointy
38.
Black hat. Yeah.
Yeah, at that time, 38, you're getting up there. But she, again, she had a 4-year-old daughter and pregnant with another child. And this was all done on the basis of these young girls who were literally at the time, there's two stories to this. One was that they were eating bread that had zygote in it, which was causing people to actually have mental episodes, right? It's this bread in the rye. The rye was actually infected, and so it caused these hallucinogenic, moments of mental thoughts, and also,
and of course, people put that down to witchcraft.
Witchcraft, of course, and then also you've got young girls who are, wanting to, like all young girls do, be noticed, right? They want to be something, because let's face it, being part of that religious background then was very, very conformist for women. You had no rights. You had, you were property of your husband. You got no attention really outside of, you stayed home and you had kids and you looked after the house and you did whatever. There was really not. So these young girls, we're talking, between the ages of 9 and 14 or 15, were obviously seeking attention, right? And so the story, so there's so many kind of, it's like, what do you believe? I don't know. I think it's kind of a combination of both for me. I sort of believe that there may have been this infected rye, and we know that this exists, and we know that it does cause these hallucinogenic, mental episodes. And so there may have been some of that, and some just attention seeking from young girls who wanted to be noticed and wanted to, stand out. So it's kind of a shocking thing. And, we will probably never 100% know, because we're looking at old written documents, mostly from the minister, the priest that was there, and from the church. So you're getting a very biased opinion, of course. And those on the council for the witch trials themselves were pretty biased, and all men.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep, for sure.
So,
yeah.
Now, of course, not everyone charged with witchcraft was a woman. There was a few men in there too. But, I think there was a lot of underlying circumstances, but there was certainly a hysteria around the concept of the witch and the evilness and the ability to, to lay with the devil, and all of these things that were coming out at that time that were being said. And so certainly you see that in the older sections of Salem. You'll still see some of the, the leftover things in the cemeteries and things like that. But for the most part now, it's quite touristy. So a lot of it is more what we would consider modern takes on a witch, on witchcraft, and it's
right.
it's kind of it's acceptable there, obviously.
The town's going to play on that as well.
Right, yeah.
Of course, by all means, create the tourist trap kind of thing. Why not, right?
Salem's a fascinating place. It's beautiful, and there's a lot of lovely, wonderful people there. And, I would definitely say go visit it. It's kind of like a second, third home for me.
Mm-hmm.
I've been through the Pilgrim Cemetery there. It's quite fascinating up in the hill in Plymouth. And that's one place that if you do go, make sure you drive down to Plymouth and go to the old cemetery. There's some very, very old stones in there. And some people's names that are still prevalent in the community today, but, families that go back a long way. But I think in terms of Salem, it was much the same as many of those situations at those times, right? That people were a little bit ignorant to a lot of things. There was no real education for anybody, so they were educated by the church. And so it was a very biased, one-sided education. And for the most part, having, the freedom to think and the freedom to be really didn't happen. It was very much a closed community. And you think about that, because most of these communities, before they became large cities, were very small places. So you may have had 100, 200, 300 people, maybe less, and they would all be going to the same church, maybe one or two. Or you'll notice, especially in Ontario, and I don't know if you've noticed this, Ian, but you drive into a small town, or what's left of a small town today, and you'll often see at least 4 churches, one on each corner. Mm-hmm. Sometimes all 4 across from each other, kitty-cornered. And, so you would have had your early, like your Methodist, and then you would have had your Lutheran and your Anglican and your Presbyterian. And, then every once in a while you might see a Baptist or, but I think for the most part in most of these little towns, they were Methodist or Lutheran or Anglican or Presbyterian. Right. So it's those ideas were brought with those people, and of course from the places that they came, they're bringing these old beliefs with them that are even old when they come here, right? Because they've already been going on for 400 years in their own, their own homeland. So I find it interesting that, it's brought here, and of course the actual witches' gates, like we see at Doan's Hollow, they're very rare here. Like they're not something that you see in every cemetery or every, graveyard.
No, not at all.
But you will certainly see the iron fences in almost all of them, or an iron gate of some sort. So I think that that's just an easier take on a witch's gate. It's certainly not as fascinating to look at.
No, just a big old fence. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same
even
time,
the main cemetery here in Hamilton, the Hamilton Cemetery on York Boulevard, the oldest cemetery here in the city, and also the largest. Yeah, they have a huge iron fence running the entire length. And I can't tell you how long this cemetery is. It's
Hamilton Cemetery, I think, is 104 acres in total on 2 levels.
Yeah.
Right?
It's and they've got this iron fence running the entire length. And I'd thought about it before. It's like, okay, here's this fence. Well, now it makes sense.
Right. And also, too, probably something that you will see, too, is if you take the time, and you've obviously been, I mean, when I lived there, that cemetery was, quite like, I was there a lot. Even the commercial, I don't know if you ever saw the Arby's commercial that I shot, the Believe It or Not Arby's commercial.
Yes, I did. Yes, I've seen it.
That was shot there. That was shot in the Hamilton Cemetery in the lower level, down in the lower level. But so that if you go in there and now that you're aware of this, if you go in and you start looking around, you will truly see way more iron in there than you thought from before, because even some of the headstones themselves were put together in a way that there's iron embedded in the heads, especially in the obelisks, right? Because there was always like an iron rod that was placed between the base stone and the obelisk itself. And that, of course, is to hold the stones together. But the reason being of the iron was it was very, it was a metal that was easy to work at that time. It was affordable and you could do these things. But it also played as again, attaching that element of iron to the headstone in order to ward off those, those extra evil intentions. And also, too, you'll notice within little family plots or family with the little iron fences that were placed around family grave sites.
Yes, great.
That again, the same thing, right? They were using this iron as obviously it's a metal that was worked quite prevalently at that time, and it was quite easy. Ornate wrought iron was very beautiful, but at the same time it held those magical abilities of being able to ward off bad things, right? So
okay, no, I've never thought about that before, because there's a couple cemeteries now that are popping into my mind that oh yes, I've seen those fences around individual graves.
Right.
The one cemetery that really pops into my mind is in Niagara Falls, the Drummond Hill Cemetery.
Oh, Drummond Hill, yes, of course, yeah.
Yeah, there's a grave site there of a War of 1812 officer named Cecil Bishop.
Right.
His grave is completely surrounded by an iron fence, and then there's another one that's right beside the Laura Secord grave site that is surrounded. And I've never thought about that before. Okay, well, it's very interesting.
Yeah, you have also, too, like underneath the big oak tree there, you've got that whole section that's completely fenced off.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
yep,
that
big,
huge old tree they've got there.
Yep, the big old tree that's there. And then you also have a number, if you haven't seen them, if you come off the back entrance, so if you come from the side street and you park at the back lot and you come in, there's actually a few metal headstones actually constructed from metal. Yes. They're more into the turn of the century, the 1900s, but that became something as well. You started to see metal headstones popping up, right? So while they weren't iron per se, they were metal. And, the one thing about them being metal was that they cast them. So they could cast the metal. And the other thing was that it offered that extra protection from the elements, but it also offered that extra